Looks like we're live and ready to go. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, you are.
Okay, very good. With that, we'll start with our next topic on the agenda, and that is the performance compensation report. And we have Treasurer Meyer, Mr. Tom Chapman, the chairman of the board for the Wyoming Retirement System, David Swindell, the executive director of the Wyoming Retirement System, as well as Sam Masudi, the CIO for the Wyoming Retirement System. So, Treasurer Meyer, would you want to start, and then we'll go to the retirement system? Does that work for you?
That's fine, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, we're going to take our stuff to the IFC to get our final approval on that. And Matt Sackett's our third-party administrator, so Matt's going to give you kind of a update and take it away, Matt.
All right. Thanks, Chairman, members of the committee. Matt Sackett with the Treasurer's Office. I'll just provide you an update on the performance compensation plan. With regard to the Treasurer's Office performance comp plan, we're still finalizing the numbers, as Treasurer Myers said. We're going to present those to the IFC on Thursday for approval. Overall, the implementation of the performance comp plan reporting in this first year of implementation, I think, has been delayed relative to what we would expect in the future. RVK, our consultant, usually has their numbers finalized that first week of October. But this year, as you know, we've had a number of reporting delays monthly. So from our office, which means that RVK didn't have the data as timely as they normally would. So that kind of put them, behind starting in October to get those numbers done. In addition, RVK basically has to run the numbers twice because we have overall performance, of the different pools and funds and asset classes. But then for performance compensation, they basically have to run it again because there's a number of asset classes that are excluded, a number of investments that are excluded. These include a number of legacy investments that weren't made by our investment team, as well as some short-term assets that don't really make sense to be used in a performance compensation plan. This would include like the SAP ladder strategy. So this requires basically a full second set of monthly performance calculations for the total fund, a number of asset class composites, and then also the benchmarks. So this is further complicated by the diverse nature of 10 investment pools and roughly 18 asset classes. And in these calculations, the plan requires an estimated alpha in dollar figures, not in return figures. So this requires an additional step to estimate the monthly delta that was earned with a hypothetical what would have been earned if we just had the benchmarks. So we have to do these calculated alphas monthly. So that further complicates some of these calculations. But I would say, having been through the process now once, we've developed, I think, proper procedures and ways to move forward. And so in the future, I think we'll have this done in a more timely manner. I think a lot of these complications we weren't necessarily expecting, and then digging into it, calculating performance twice, and then the investment team was also paid 50% on the total fund performance and then 50% on asset class performance. So we can't just do a total fund comparison. We also have to do asset class individual comparisons. So I can say big picture for total fund performance exceeded the estimated alpha produced in dollar terms of around $78 million over what the benchmark was. So we're going to get these to the IFC and get those approved. So I stand for any questions. And we'll get you a report, obviously, when we get that all finalized.
Okay, questions for Mr. Sackett regarding that? All right, seeing none. Mr. Swindell, do you want to start, or would you like Mr. Chapman to start?
Mr. Chairman, we're going to start with our board chair, Mr. Chapman, and then I'll follow up.
Okay, very good. Go ahead, Mr. Chapman.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. As my first appearance in front of you as chair of the retirement system, I'm really excited and looking forward to working with you all on how to make a great system even better. I'm lucky, but maybe not so lucky, that I'm following the large foot shoes of Laura Ladd, our previous chair. The system's in great shape, but there are clearly things that we can do better. When I joined the system, our fund investment returns were ranked 67th out of 69 funds. Today, I'm happy to say that we're up in the top third relative to our peers. What has really gotten us there? It's been our employees. The system recognizes that our employees are our single most important assets when fulfilling our responsibilities to the members. And then under that, investment returns are the most important aspect to delivering the pension benefits. As many of you heard a few years ago, retaining and motivating our investment employees is critical to us being able to fulfill our fiduciary responsibilities as board members to the constituents. As a reminder, we created this performance compensation structure to reward employees who produce long-term risk-adjusted returns, which supports the system's goals, objectives, and most importantly, it aligns all interests. I'm happy to say that in our first year, it has worked and the team beat our benchmark by 124 basis points or $106 million. The key element that I really like about it is this was done with a higher return per unit of risk than 2/3 of our peer programs. So that to me shows that we've been doing it very responsibly. As we want alignment and reward for good long-term investment decisions, the payout is staggered over 3 years, and Dave will go through that. Another benefit of this new performance compensation is frankly attracting talent. An example was earlier this year, we had a senior investment officer position open up and we had more than 200 applicants apply. We hired a very seasoned individual from one of the Texas funds, and he will tell you that without this compensation structure, we would not have been able to get him. We also want to make sure that this is transparent and verified in terms of verification. So the returns have been verified by our internal auditing or our internal accounting department, as well as Makita, our investment consultant. We take this very seriously. Finally, I really want to thank the committees for their support in this program, as it has clearly made a difference in the short term, but we know for a fact it's going to make a difference in the long-term success of the system. Again, this is an ability the structure will have the ability to attract, retain, and engage highly qualified individuals. So with that, I will now turn it over to Dave to kind of walk through our report. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Mr. Chairman, I'll just refer to the report that should be in the committee's packet. We were required to submit a report to both the Capital and Finance Committee as well as the Joint Appropriations Committee by 1 November. A couple of highlights.
David, do you want to have us share the screens as you walk through it?
I don't think we need to do that, Mr. Chairman,
Okay.
unless we want to get into some details. I'm going to make my presentation very brief. I know the committee's time is valuable. I just do want to remind the committee just of a couple of things about the program. The compensation is based upon the rolling 3-year return, but this is the first year of the program, so the initial year is just based upon 1-year return. Next year it will be based upon 2 years of return, and then in the third and subsequent years it's based upon a rolling 3-year return, comparing that to the benchmark. The way this works is that if you beat the benchmark, as Tom mentioned, we beat it by 1.24%, but then how much was that worth to the fund? It was worth like $106 million, and you take 2% of that additional alpha dollars. So 98% stays with the fund. 2% generates a fund which can potentially be available for performance compensation, and then that is further limited by the percentages of wages, with senior employees earning a little bit higher percentage versus the junior employees. Our performance in the retirement system is a little different than Treasury. Ours is based upon the total fund. We don't break it out by asset classes. And payments are vested over a 3-year period. So only 25% of the earned bonus was paid this year. We'll pay out another 25% of this next year. And then finally, in year 3, we'll pay out 50%. The total returns are on page 2 of the report. We did beat the benchmark by 124 basis points. We also provided returns over previous years so that the committee can see that. And the peer ranking, as Tom mentioned, we're in the upper third. We ranked, our percentile ranking is 32. And that is a significant improvement over some prior years if you go back far enough. There's a discussion of risk, which is required to provide to the committee. And as Tom mentioned, we actually did this by assuming less risk than perhaps the benchmark would have had. You can measure that a number of ways, and the report lays that out. You can calculate the Sharpe ratio. You can also just look at it as, in the end, how risky were our assets compared to the benchmark. And for the reporting period, we actually had less risky assets than our benchmark did. So we achieved these returns by assuming a little less risk than our benchmark. And then finally, there's a page that with a table that indicates the exact amounts that were paid out. We paid out $176,526 in performance compensation. And there's a table that lays out what the future years are going to be. As I mentioned, 25% is paid this year. And so we'll pay another 25% next year, another $176,000. And then finally, in year 3, we'll pay out the remaining 50%, which would be $353,000. And then the requirement was to estimate future payouts. And we provided a table which showed what would happen if the team continues to beat their benchmarks sufficient to earn a maximum performance payout. These amounts that we've paid so far are earned. And then there's some peer comparisons and a discussion of the audit process, which I think Chairman Chapman addressed. We did have this verified by our internal certified public accountants, as well as our independent investment consulting firm that's hired by the board. Also, these calculations were made available and reviewed by the Investment Funds Committee. And again, that's a little different. Treasury has to have theirs approved by the Investment Funds Committee since they don't have the board, but ours is subject to review, so it goes a little quicker. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd open up for any questions. We're very pleased with the program. As Tom mentioned, I think it is very additive to our effort to recruit and retain qualified investment staff. And in the end, that's one of the most important things for any pension fund. Most of the pension is paid for with investment earnings. It's not contributions from employees or employers. So it's important to have a quality investment program. And this performance compensation program adopted by the legislature is an important component of that.
Very good. Questions, committee? Representative Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm just curious, Mr. Chapman mentioned that it enhanced their recruiting opportunities, but obviously that meant there was a position to fill. Has this also had an impact on turnover and reduced that?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Schwartz, we have had just one departure from the team. That was one of the junior analysts. And he had been with us for 5 years, but he was offered another opportunity that exceeded his ability as an analyst here, even with performance compensation. Was a position with the University of Wyoming Foundation. And so, although we have lost one person, that intellectual talent stayed with the state. So we're pleased to do that. And to this point, we'll have one more recruiting opportunity as we try to replace that. And I believe the existence of this program will be very, very helpful in attracting a very good talent pool from which to recruit from.
Further questions? Representative Western.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, in filling that new position, how does the compensation package compare as a recruiting tool to other retirement systems, certainly regionally and nationally? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Western, there's a discussion of that in the report that does provide some peer rankings and some details on compensation. I believe that's in Appendix E. Our base salaries remain bottom quartile. However, the existence of the performance compensation can rise that. And in general, this program was designed with a feeling that we probably could never compete with some of the base salaries that some of the systems offer. But we might be able to pay more money as long as we could demonstrate to the members of the retirement system that they earned it, i.e. it was a performance comp. So base wages remain in the lower quartile. Exact compensation will be higher than that as long as we continue to exceed the benchmark.
Mr. Masudi, would you like to add anything to what's been said here this afternoon?
No, not much. I think we're just really happy with the performance. Really proud of the team and the job they did this year, despite all the turmoil. And the outperformance of 1.24% was the highest since 2012. So very happy, and thank you all for supporting this program. It means a lot to us and really helps us keep the team stable. Thank you.
Any one asset class that drove that outperformance that you noticed?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
One or two?
Excuse me, sir?
One or two?
Yes, so equity performed very well. It beat by 1.24%. Marketable alts beat by a bit. Private real assets beat by 4%. So that was all good. We've seen some really good performance from our privates.
Very good. Any further questions, committee? Mr. Sackett, if you're still with us, you had discussed that calculating it on the treasurer's side, or the state side, you have to run the calculation twice because we do it for total package as well as for individual asset classes. But you said you're getting a formula and a system put in place to where it will be easier in the future. Is there anything that we need to do from a statutory standpoint to aid you in making that work a little better? When we set it up based on the way both the retirement system and the treasurer's office wanted it. Now that you're operating within those parameters, are you still liking it, I guess, is the question.
Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairman Walters, no, I would anticipate future years, the November 1 deadline shouldn't be hard to meet. It was just, I'll say, a perfect storm of late data, going through it the first time, figuring out some of the details that need to be had when you have 18 different asset classes and 10 pools, and then calculating those differences. I think RVK's belief was, as we're now progressing through and have data timely, we will be doing these in tandem along the way. So no, short answer is no, I don't think we need any changes to the.
Okay.
Thank you.
Very good, very good. Any other questions, committee? All right, seeing none, I'm glad to hear that the program's working the way we had hoped it would, and all of you offered your suggestions to get it to where it is today, so we're excited to see it working. But with that, I think we'll move on to our next topic on the agenda, seeing no questions. So thank you to the retirement system folks, and we certainly appreciate your time today.
Thank you for having us, Mr. Chairman. We appreciate the support of the committee. I think this is a valuable program that has been beneficial to us and will continue to be beneficial as our joint mission to secure the retirement of public employees in the state of Wyoming.
Very good. Very good. Well, enjoy the afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next topic on the agenda is cash flow projections and short-term borrowing practices. And Ms. Scott, I think this is you.
Yes. Thank you, Vice Chairman Walters. You may recall at the last meeting of the Select Committee, there was a request for research on cash flow matters. So there is a memo in your packet entitled Cash Flow Borrowing Practices and Analysis. And if it's okay with you, I will share my screen.
Absolutely, sounds great.
Okay. This is just to give you an idea of what the memo looks like. The first half of the memo really goes over comparing practices among other states. And, cash flow borrowing is short-term borrowing, less than a year typically, just to address the differences between revenues and ongoing expenditures. Most states are using short-term borrowing, and on page 1 there are listed the typical types of short-term borrowing instruments that governmental entities use. According to U.S. Census data, 35 states were using this type of short-term borrowing in 2017. Wyoming was not one of them. Although Wyoming statutes give the state treasurer permission to issue tax and revenue anticipation notes, that has not been done in recent years. And it really is because of sufficient revenues as well as provisions for interfund borrowing that the legislature has given. Currently, the LSRA, the general fund, has unlimited borrowing from the LSRA if there were to be a cash flow need. And this has been an advantage for, the fact that the LSRA allows many, statutorily allows many programs to have that type of support from it, has been an advantage for many of Wyoming's state programs, and has avoided in many cases the cost of short-term borrowing, the cost of reinsurance, and also the need in many cases for holding higher reserves or very close cash flow management. So I want to emphasize that there's no immediate cash flow problem for Wyoming. The fund balance for the general fund and the budget reserve account currently is in the neighborhood of $400 million. So there's not an immediate issue. But this could be an area that needs more attention in the event that policymakers would decide to aggressively spend down available reserves. The second half of the paper goes into a specific cash flow analysis for Wyoming's executive branch, and it is a basic analysis. I can go over these 4 charts that are offered in the paper. Figure 1 goes over total general fund expenditures by agency by month for fiscal year 19 and 20, and then the first 3 months of fiscal year 21. And you can see from this chart, it's a very busy chart. You can see this is a very complex thing that's going on with all these different agencies drawing on the general fund as needed for their operations and according to the budget permission that they've been given. As you look at it, you can see there's a lot of variability. The bars, are high and then low and high and then low, and there's not a routineness to it overall. Also, I guess another point I would make is that there's not an overall coordination with this at this time. Moving on to figure 2A goes over the total general fund expenditures by fiscal year, with blue bars being fiscal year 19, green being fiscal year 20, and then yellow is the first 3 months of fiscal year 21. The dashed red line is LSO's estimates of what expenditures for the general fund were going to be with the first 10% reductions in budgets. And one thing I offer from this chart is that, you can see that in most months we're kind of over that $100 million for expenditures, and that's the average is about 110 million per month. Another thing is you can see by looking at the dashed line compared to the yellow bars that the expenditures for the first 3 months were lower than LSO's estimates. And I did put together a detail on that. Whoops, I have stopped sharing my screen. Okay. Can you still see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you very much.
It's the blue, yellow, green bar graph is still showing on our end.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Chairman. So I did put together a detail, if we move down a little bit lower, Karen, to show that the actual expenditures for the first 3 months of fiscal year 21 are 42.5 million less than what was anticipated if we go to figure 2A. Karen. Also, yeah, so Karen's just going to show you that for 2A. So you can see that there has been work on reducing our expenditures. Moving to figure 3, it shows estimates of the general fund revenue. And Karen, I'm just not quite sure if I'm sharing the screen or if you're sharing the screen.
Holly, I believe you got stuck, so I went ahead and started sharing the screen for you.
Okay, thank you. Can we go on to figure 3?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you. Figure 3 here shows estimated general fund revenue by source by month for fiscal year 21. These are LSO's estimates. And one takeaway I want to make here is we're averaging about 60 million on the revenue side as opposed to about 110 million on the expenditure side. The red line is actuals compared to estimates, and so the actuals were higher than the estimates. One other thing that might not be immediately noticeable on this chart is that the revenue to the budget reserve account coming from FMRs, which would be in a black, and severance tax, which would be kind of in a brown, are not showing. And that's because the estimated revenue from FMR and severance tax is not estimated to fulfill deposits to the budget reserve account commensurate with prior years. The budget reserve account gets paid last. Moving on to figure 4, it just kind of puts it all together with the actual revenues and expenditures. So you really get that picture of the green bars, estimated revenue being by month being less than the red bars of estimated expenditures. You can see the lines are the first 3 months of actuals, and that they have come much closer together. The revenues have been higher and the expenditures have been lower than projected. And that's really due to all the work that has been done by the governor and the legislature on this issue. So in summary, there is not an immediate cash flow problem for Wyoming, but this is an area that may need more attention or management in future years, which I think is why you requested this research.
Okay. Committee, questions on Ms. Scott's presentation? Representative Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Polly, going back to figure 1.
Pardon me, I didn't quite hear you.
Going back to figure 1, which it's an interesting chart. It's not the easiest to read, but I'm just curious, did you just discern any patterns? Because just looking at it, I don't see any. And partly I'm wondering if there are particular agencies that have particular patterns we should be aware of.
Mr. Chairman, are you seeing that chart now?
We are not. We are seeing the text.
Okay, sorry about that. Let me.
I think it's actually some of your meeting minute notes text.
Okay, thank you very much.
We are seeing your screen. It's just not what we would like to see on your, or what you're trying to show on your screen, I believe.
Okay.
Polly, would you like me to share?
I think I may have it. Do you now see it?
We do see it now. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry, Mr. Chairman. Yes, Mr. Chairman and Representative Schwartz, I think that you make a very good point that there is just a lot of variability to this. There are some consistencies. You can see the judicial branch in there in a bright green coming in at $2 million every month, and that's consistent. But you know, these amounts for a year are up to about $1.5 billion or about $3 billion for a biennium. And so there is just a lot of variability with little spots of consistency is how I would characterize it.
Thank you, Paula.
Representative Speaker Harshman, excuse me.
Hey, can you hear me, Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Ms. Scott, thank you for all this. It's really good. So as I look at your figure 1, I'm just trying to, just another clarifying question. So really the max looks like September on a monthly basis. It's kind of our max, and then, I don't know, July, I guess. And I can't really tell exactly what groups are doing the most borrowing. Or is it just really to pay our general fund bills and some of those things? School starts, those kind of things in the fall. But I guess my question is, you know, the LSRA is a hard-working account. There's no doubt about it. There's a lot of, but it looks to me, is the number about 200 million max that we need to cover cash flow, or is it a little more than that actually per month?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Harshman, I guess I would just kind of make sure that I've been clear that this is general fund expenditures by month by agency, and this does not reflect borrowing from LISRA. This is actual. I think, you know, there's not overall coordination of how these draws get made necessarily. Because we're looking back, we can see what happened on this, and you're absolutely right that the highest draw was in September of 18, just over 200 million. But going forward, it's hard to anticipate what it might be, and it could be very different from what we're seeing here.
All right, I got it now. My little brain, I got to figure it out now. Thank you so much. That's good stuff. Thank you.
Yes, I hope that's helpful, and I do believe that we have Don Richards with us as well. If he has any additional points he would share to clarify that.
Mr. Richards, would you like to offer any clarifying points on that?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Don Richards, Legislative Service Office, Budget Fiscal Administrator. A couple of overall points. One is historically the general fund has benefited from the statutory reserve amount, which is equal to the 5% of the general fund biennial revenues. That provides you a little over $100 million in cash flow. And that is allowed to be used to address these high months and low months. The second thing I would say is there are 3 big entities that have significant draws. that is the University of Wyoming, and you'll see that is in brown, and it is technically supposed to be on a quarterly basis, but you will see it is not consistent. They'll miss it by a month, either taking their draw early or taking it late. And as Speaker Harshman noted, September 2019, for example, you'll see no draw taken by the university. They waited until November of 19, and then you got the peak there. The second largest agency is the Community College Commission. They're also on largely a quarterly basis, although they are a bit more consistent than the university. And then finally, in the very dark blue is the state auditor, including transfers. And this is candidly why we missed, our estimates. We're projecting when certain transfers are going to be made, and we don't control, LSO has no say in when those transfers are made. The state auditor, and it's really apparent in September of 2018, you'll see they had about $75, $80 million of transfer. It's at the very lowest portion of that bar. We don't see that bar yet, but they did make about a $50 million transfer, but that will show up in October. And so our forecast, and you can see we were off by $50 million on the expenditure side in one of those months identifiable in figure 2A. And a big part of that reason is we're anticipating when these agencies are going to be requesting funds, and it is a very imperfect science.
Speaker Harshman.
So, Mr. Chairman, just kind of back on my train of thought, if I can get my train on the tracks here, Mr. Richards, and really just, so we've got the 5%, obviously, the around 100 million-ish. We've had, these construction projects in the state that have had this large kind of cash balance out there that's been, so we've had no concern at all of cash flow. Now we have fewer projects out there. And so I think that cash balance has shrunk, certainly from its high. Where are we at, though, I guess, in terms of, so we don't become one of those 35 states who are borrowing. Now, it's, again, not the worst thing in the world. Most of our states are doing it, but to avoid that. And like, for example, the LSRA, the education piece kicks off at 500 million. And so anyway, what's that number range? Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Representative Harshman. On the general fund side, the state is fortunate in that almost all of the large projects are not coming out of the general fund. So the state office building in Casper, the WLRC in Lander, the state hospital, all funded out of SIPA, and they were funded by upfront cash, meaning the legislature planned for them years in advance, similar to the Wyoming State Capitol, another large project, and you paid for those in advance. If you change your approach to funding capital construction and elect to fund them out of the general fund rather than SIPA, that will become an issue. Where that is a particular issue right now and going forward is on the school capital construction account. And the exact phenomena you described, we had several large multi-year projects that moved through the system, and the state benefited from very robust cash balances. We no longer have that benefit on the school capital construction account, and it also is not guaranteed or supported by any other fund. You'll recall the school foundation program used to support it if there was a shortfall. All of those financing mechanisms have gone away. So going forward, in the absence of legislative action, anticipate some pretty extraordinary volatility on the school capital construction account. And frankly, that's why the executive branch earlier this fall kind of pressed the brakes on 2 or 3 projects around the state, primarily because of cash flow and uncertain revenues.
Thank you, Mr. Richards. Representative Nicholas.
Don, so I'm looking at figure 4. Obviously, we're spending a lot more than the revenues coming in. So where does this leave us after March? And what's your projections for the next year? And depending on what scenarios?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Nicholas. Well, two items. Number one, when we originally prepared this, it was to see whether or not the legislature could meet and act under a traditional calendar. And in fact, we believe you can. We have extended that out, although it's not shown here on figure 4. And two things. Number one, you will spend down your large cash balance in the general fund. So at the beginning of this biennium on July 1st, there was about $230 million carryover of cash between the budget reserve account and the general fund. And you can see, because expenditures are higher than revenues, we're going to access that available cash first. The second thing, which is not illustrated in figure 4, but was alluded to by Ms. Scott, was the state pays itself last. So you will see large revenues coming in to the general fund and budget reserve account in April, May, and June. So all of the over the cap amounts from severance taxes and federal royalties are paid in the late portion of the year. We have been in conversations with SAO and the budget office. I think we're all in general agreement that that we will not go cash flow negative until at least May. I know there are some folks who want us to add on that last month. Can we make it through the fiscal year? And I think the best thing to say at this point is there's not a consensus. We're very, very close. And when we come to that consensus among the three entities and say, we can make it through the fiscal year, we will do so. We cannot make it through the biennium under the current CRAG revenues. And you see that is noticeable because the general fund has a negative balance. So getting it through the next fiscal year is under the current level of appropriations. And I know the governor is about to recommend or release his recommendations for supplemental budgets, which may impact such an analysis. But under the current known environment, you have a negative balance in the general fund.
And Don, with that current known amount, does that include the governor's already incorporated 10% reductions from earlier this fall?
Mr. Chairman, that great question. It does. Now, it's not a large negative amount, but it's about $112 million negative over the course of the biennium.
All right, Representative Nicholas, then we'll get to you, Speaker Harshman, and Representative Western.
So my understanding is, Don, that the governor is going to recommend 2.5 plus 100 million from LISRA. Have you heard that?
Mr. Chairman, I haven't heard a transfer of LISRA. I just haven't.
Let's assume that it's only 2.5. Where does that get us? And then where does another 100 million get us?
Mr. Chairman, if there is a transfer of $100 million, let's say from SIPA or from the 1% severance tax or from LSRA, and again, I don't know any of those, you would essentially eliminate that negative $112 million shortfall. So it can be addressed in a variety of ways, or additional reductions would have a similar effect.
Follow up, are you happy, Representative Nicholas? Okay, Speaker Harshman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just that 112 million deficit, does that include the payback of the statutory reserve?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Harshman, it does not. And I think that is perhaps the biggest takeaway from figure 1, in that the state has historically relied upon some level of cash balance. And you deal with this with your own business or your own personal checking account. It gets very difficult when you draw that down right to zero. So the 111 would assume you drawing the general fund right to zero. And unfortunately, the timing of revenues and expenditures don't always line up in your favor. Sometimes bills need to be paid early in the month and revenue comes in late in the month. So if you follow the practice of prior legislatures, that 5% statutory reserve amount, which is about another $112 million or $113 million, would bring the total target to $250 million or 225 million. 112 shortfall, 113 cash.
Thank you.
Representative Western.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Richards, just kind of touching on something that Speaker Harshman had mentioned earlier. What is the minimum amount that needs to be in LISRA to remain solvent at all times? Thank you.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think part of that is an expectation of the Treasurer's Office and also alluded to by Ms. Scott. But let me craft it this way. We do have unlimited borrowing authority from the general fund from the LSRA to the general fund for cash flow purposes. But that assumes that the state is able to repay that loan. So the Treasurer's Office and others would, and it's for them to say, I think they would be reluctant to loan money to the general fund for which there is no expected revenue to pay that loan off. So that's kind of the conundrum. If there is a sufficient revenue to pay off a loan, then I don't think a cash flow is a problem. They do that, for example, every year with the school foundation program. I think the school foundation program has about a $200 million loan outstanding, but they have a great record. They've always paid their loan off in June, but they do need some cash flow for timing purposes. When it comes to the general fund, it would be difficult for the auditor and the treasurer to loan the general fund when it is showing a negative balance at the end of the biennium. I'm not saying they wouldn't do it. I'm just saying it's a serious consideration. Where is the revenue going to come from to pay off the loan?
Very good. Cyrus, or Representative Western, excuse me, a follow-up or?
So in terms of maintaining solvency in LISRA, that means we need, on average, at any given time, X amount in there, or I'm sorry, I don't know if I'm just not following.
Mr. Chairman, the 5% statutory reserve amount has worked well in the past of about $100 million. And that is consistent with the school foundation program. It's a fixed amount, it's not a percentage, but you'll recall the school foundation program operates on a $100 million cash balance. You could make, some argument that maybe it should be a little higher than 5% because the budget reserve account now is so much of the spending. Recall my illustration of checking account 1 is the general fund, checking account 2 is the budget reserve account. And all we're really doing is 5% of the first checking account. But I think as a minimum, and looking back historically with your predecessors over 30 years, they have always relied on that 5% figure, and it has worked relatively well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Don.
Very good. Further questions? Ms. Scott, in doing your research on various loan methods for states, was there any discussion of what the interest rates might be? And the reason I ask the question is would the state be better off in certain instances to borrow money and leave our cash invested somewhere and have a net profit over doing that, or will it always be a cost loser to the state?
Mr. Chairman, in response to that question, I would just offer that in attending a webinar by the National Association of State Treasurers that was all about cash flow borrowing, the consensus from that was really that the rates for borrowing are very, very low, all-time lows, commensurate with what you're hearing from the State Treasurer's Office, that fixed income rates are very low. So if you need to go to the market to make one of these issuances for short-term debt, it is a time when the interest rates are very low for that.
Okay, thank you. Further questions for Ms. Scott or Mr. Richards? Okay, well, excellent information. Thank you very much, Ms. Scott. Thank you, Mr. Richards. Certainly appreciate it. I think we can keep moving on down our agenda and spending policy results. Ms. Scott.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. This committee is charged with making recommendations on spending policies to the legislature. And the select committee's report on spending policies is partially prepared for this meeting in advance and was sent to you by email. The report that you received is very similar to what you saw last year. It's kind of a history of the spending policies going back to 2000. And the work of this committee is to add their analysis and recommendations to it and provide that report or that recommendation to the full legislature before it convenes. So that is with you and it's in your court, and whatever direction the select committee agrees upon can be conveyed into that report and then provided as is necessary to the legislature before convening. To go along with your spending policy dialogue and policy discussion, I do have the spending policy results for fiscal year 20, as well as estimated spending policy results for fiscal year 21. If you would like to go over those at all.
Questions right now? Not seeing any. Yeah, that would be great. If you would like to go over those, that would be perfect.
Okay, let me work on that.
Seeing the table 2B, there we go. Now we've got the flow chart.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Well, I can make this very short. Fiscal year 20 spending policy results were unchanged from the preliminary results that we had in September when the committee met. Because I know that the select committee is considering legislation having to do with the possibly changing the timing of distributions from the permanent Wyoming Mineral Trust Fund reserve account, I thought I could highlight that for fiscal year 20, the general fund spending policy amount was just about $190 million rounded. That was paid all at once into the fund at the end of September, which is the way that it's designed. If it were adjusted so that those transfers were made on a monthly or a quarterly basis, as the select committee is considering, it would have been $16 million per month or $48 million per quarter. Can you see my screen okay? Would you like that to be bigger?
If you can enlarge it, that would be great. It's pretty fine print. I know we all have a copy of this, but that way we're looking at both. Much better, much better.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so again, the general fund amount was 190 million, distributed all at once under the current method of doing it. Looking backward, that would have been 16 million, 190 million a year, would have been 16 million a month or 48 million a quarter. And that was about the only thing that I thought would perhaps aid your discussion. The trends for fiscal year 21 are really the same for every fund, which is we're showing lower investment earnings estimated and lower reserve account balances because there are going to be transfers necessary from that reserve account to meet the current spending policies. And that is really everything that I had for you at this time.
Okay, Representative Western.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did a quick search on the website, but is the 2020 fiscal data book out yet? Polly, do you know that?
Mr. Vice Chairman and Representative Western, it is not out yet. I believe in December it will be out.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Polly.
Further questions? Speaker Harshman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Polly, could you go to towards the end of the report and show the chart on the Hathaway Student Scholarship? Might be the last page, next to the last page.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Harshman, I believe I'm there.
Yeah, and if you could go down just a little bit more, yeah, okay, that's perfect. I just wanted the members of this committee, there's, if you look down at the bottom, the Hathaway Student Scholarship Expenditure account, and then if you follow the, and that's the earnings that fill that up, but then you follow the arrow to the right and up and the reserve account. And this is a little bit different than the common school and the permanent trust. There's really no spending policy. The spending policy is the number of kids who earn the scholarship, right? And that's currently about 18 million. So this started with 405 million in the corpus. You can see the corpus today is 595 million. So it's earning us, we have 4.5% on the reserve account. And that's, coincidentally about 20 some million bucks or so, 26 it looks like. And so I'll just say this to the members, part of the issue of this, because we pay out about 10 million in September for scholarships and then pay another 10 million in January. So we pretty much blow through that whole reserve accounts back and forth. So we've got a proposal in a bill, one of our Wyoming's tomorrow, to increase that 4.5% to 9%. And so it would just make that reserve a little bit bigger. We did a similar thing with the higher ed endowment a couple of years ago, because we found these reserve accounts were too small because they're different than the common school and the permanent trust fund, because they're really going back and forth a lot and they're emptying out partway through the year and then filling back up. So that's out there. And I just wanted to bring that to your attention. By taking it from 4.5% to 9%, it basically makes it similar to what we're doing in the common school account and the permanent trust fund. Instead of 150%, it's basically about 200%, knowing that over 50% of it's flowing in and out of it at all times. And I don't want to get too deep in this, but that's really, so when you see that in that bill, that's what's going on there. It's just to build a little bigger reserve account. Because I think we've all heard these stories. Well, the Hathaway's in trouble. Hathaway can't pay. It's the reserve account is too small. We're dumping, you can see the growth of the corpus since 2006, gone from 405 million to 595. So we're doing great. All that's great. We just need a little more cash flow ability, I think, out of that reserve account. So anyway, that's just a little deal coming at us a little later. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Speaker Harshman. Further questions? Representative Schwartz.
There you go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I was a little surprised in the text on page 6 in referencing the excellence in higher education. It had a rather significantly atypical high return. I'm wondering, first of all, why that account had that atypically high return. but also it puts the reserve account over the max, which would require moving funds into the corpus. Shortly after, in 2018, we allocated general fund money to that reserve account to stabilize it. I mean, there's not exactly a question there, but anything you can do to enlighten me would be very helpful.
Go ahead.
Mr. Vice Chairman and Representative Walters, or Representative Schwartz, yes, you have nailed it. That is an exact description of what's happened in the Excellence in Higher Education Endowment corpus for fiscal year 20. There were unusually high return for that fund. I can tell you what that was, and this would be the yield. It was over 13% for fiscal year 20, whereas it's been low single digits in prior years. I do not have a full detail on what exactly happened there. I think generally speaking, it has to do with the fact that it's invested primarily in fixed income, and there was something that came due there. And I do want to clarify that the over 13% yield, not return, would be the correct way to say that. If we still have representatives from the Treasurer's Office here, and I'm not sure that we do, I for one would think that they would have a little more detail on exactly what happened. I think some type of a fixed income instrument came due, perhaps.
Mr. Fleming, are you still available to answer that question?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I am on that. Mr. Chairman, Representative Schwartz, my numbers are slightly different on that. I don't see higher education having that type of yield. Yes, they did have a better performance because of what happened before. With our permanent funds, we've switched to two different allocations. One would be a total return, much more like a permanent fund, and the other one would be a yield-oriented fund. So it does have a much higher amount of fixed income, and that would cause it as rates dropped. It performed at a very high level, same way with workers' compensation. But my numbers do not show a 13% return. But from the presentation that Josh had this morning, higher education on a one-year basis was 2.4, 3 years is 3.5, quarterly is 2.1. So I'm not sure. Yes, it's higher, but it's not anywhere near in that 13% range.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman?
Follow up. Go ahead, Representative Schwartz.
Thank you, Patrick, because I had also seen that 2.4 and was confused, but it still leaves the question for me, are we going to have an issue where the reserve account is going to have a mandatory transfer into the corpus, which is partly based on the appropriation we made in 2018?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Schwartz, from the numbers that I have, and Don, I don't know, Mr. Richards, if he could pull that up, but if you look at the reserve account, what we have showing for the next couple of years, higher education is one of the first funds to run out of money in the reserve account. So I believe there is an issue, but without looking at it real quickly, I don't know for sure.
Mr. Richards, any comment? Or Ms. Scott, go ahead. Ms. Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to make a clarifying statement and also promise to follow up that, investment income posted to the account for fiscal year 20 was $16.2 million, which, on a corpus of 120 million or 121 million is pretty high, but we can follow up on that. But absolutely agree with the statement that there is a declining reserve account for this, as well as if we move on and look at the fiscal year 21 estimated results, which we know that these are preliminary and could very well change. The picture, shows a tip to the corpus of 9.5 million because of the fact that right now we're temporarily suspended on that tip. And also the yield going forward, you can see is estimated, at much different, 3.5 million for fiscal year 21. So absolutely agree that there is a declining reserve for this fund, and what's happened in fiscal year 20 seems to be an atypical situation.
Speaker Harshman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And if I could, I have a question for Don Richards, just for my memory, but it seems like, didn't we, seems like we changed the reserve account balance, but we also filled it up with, I don't think it was general fund. I thought it was SFRA, School Foundation reserve account dollars, to fill the reserve account as we increased it. And then it changes the profile, obviously, and allows the tip. But I'm just, because it's at that 150%. It seems like we changed that a few years ago. It was too small.
Mr. Richards.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Harshman. Representative Harshman is correct. In the 2018 budget bill, the legislature moved $6.7 million from the SFRA to the Higher Education Excellence Endowment Reserve Account. So that's the largest portion of that cash is from that transfer. I believe 2 times in the last 15 years, we've essentially exhausted or actually have exhausted that reserve account. So I call this account the canary in the coal mine, where it is sufficiently small, but the historically the spending policy has exceeded actual income and has required some additional measures. The Joint Appropriations Committee also in 2018 restructured the payout of that, required the institutions of higher learning to retain a reserve account of their own, as well as lowered the spending policy, increased the reserve amount to 150%, and then filled it with that SFRA transfer. So there are a number of mechanisms that JAC address that. If I might indulge the committee, just a quick clarification on the prior conversation. And I think this is between the income discussion and the total return discussion from this morning. I completely agree with CIO Fleming. The returns were decent, but the yield, which was largely from a $13.5 million realized gain. And because this works on an income basis as opposed to a total return basis, and I believe this was a large sale of fixed income due to a rebalancing of your portfolio and a revision in terms of going forward. You had a lot of the State Treasurer's Office, the state of Wyoming had a lot of unrealized gains in this account. They realized them to the tune of $13.6 million. And that's why you see the $16.2 million in interest, dividends, and realized capital gains. It's a very subtle difference, but when they use the term return, that means the total return, which is what the performance compensation is based off of. Yield is what income is, interest, dividends, and realized capital gains. And I think it's that distinction which trips up some of the conversation.
Okay.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman. So,
Mr. Harshman, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Richards. So really, our work in 2018 Appropriations Committee, I think I don't know. I think we fixed this account. I think it had always been from inception back in 2005 when we created it with School Foundation money. Same time we did the Hathaway. We didn't set it up right in the beginning. And I was part of that, obviously. So I'll take the blame on that. But I think it's in a lot better shape now with the reserve account size. And then as we don't allow the institutions to spend every nickel now, they got to have their own little reserve. Any comments on that just for the committee?
I think it's in, Mr. Chairman, Representative Harshman, I believe this account is in much better shape than it was 2 years ago or 10 years ago. I also would reemphasize what CIO Fleming indicated. If Polly could screen down one additional page, looking at fiscal year 21, you will see the anticipated earnings are still 2.2 million less than the spending policy. So that 5.7 million spending policy is substantially higher than the 3.5 million. And I think that's what CIO Fleming was referring to, in that we're still projecting a drawdown. There will still need to be some realized capital gains going forward, but this account and the operation is in much better shape than it was just a few years ago.
Don?
Go ahead.
So my question is, are we monitoring the, I think we required them to keep 0.25%, and they could only expend 4.75 or something to that extent, so that each, so the college would preserve those dollars. The question is that enough to cover the shortfalls that are projected, and for how long?
Well, Mr. Chairman, like all of the accounts, if you look at only interest and dividends, all of them run to zero. The reserve accounts are not large enough, whether it's this account, Hathaway, PMTF, Common School. On the other hand, if you look at historic returns, then yes, it would be sufficient. But I think your advisors have at least alluded to whether or not history is a good guide of the next decade's returns. It will absolutely help. And it will help all of those institutions, but if we only if the state only generates interest and dividends for 6 years, all of your reserves will be exhausted.
So let's follow up, Don. Do we know how much that it is that they have in reserves? Maybe is it enough? I don't think it's going to be enough to cover 2.7 million. And let's assume there's a, half of that is going to be in returns, unrealized gains. But do we keep a running tally of how much each school has?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Nicholas, yes, each of those colleges and the university have to report annually to this committee as well as the Joint Appropriations Committee. And to my knowledge, I believe each institution has reported. And where that 2.7 million comes from is the reserve account to the right side of the page. So that's about 3 years worth, 8.5 million divided by 2.7 per year. And that's what Patrick or CIO Fleming was referring to, is if we only generate interest and dividends, the reserve account can balance it for about 3 years, maybe a little bit more. And then the local institutions can make it through those 3 years. But after that, at some point, there is a need for realized capital gains in order to sustain the 4.75 spending policy.
Or really,
Speaker Harshman?
Yeah, or really any spending policy over about 2%. Is that what dividends and interest 2.1%?
Mr. Chairman, yes, there are a couple of accounts. The Common School account is earning a little bit more, closer to 2.5. But yes, that's the large picture, or the big picture.
Thank you.
Further questions? Well, I guess Mr. Fleming just needs to make sure this account generates more income, it sounds to me like. So there's your task. Committee, is there any desire to change the spending policy? Do anything different with it? Representative Western.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And just I ask the committee to forgive me and indulge me just because I can follow the line of thought. If the spending policy amount is 4.5, 4.75, whatever it is, and we're only getting returns of 2%, 2.5%, that other 2% or so is a pretty big amount of backfill that we're going to have to find that money and stick it in that account from somewhere else. Or Speaker Harshman or Mr. Fleming, am I missing something here, or because that's a lot of backfill we're gonna have to come up with.
Spot on.
Yeah, I can answer that, I think.
Speaker Harshman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's all about what's profiled. And we've had this argument for the whole time I've been in the legislature. What should you profile? Should you profile capital gains? And we've taken a real conservative view that no. And it helps us it helps our appropriation staff. It's like I said earlier, when you ask for something as a little kid for Christmas, no, can't afford it. No more arguing. And you just say, when that money's not showing, can't afford it. But if you look at the actual returns over the last 15 years in common school and permanent, that's 5.5, 5.6, 5.7%. That's our 15-year average. But we've always only profiled on the goldenrod, right? On the goldenrod, 2.1, 2.2. Mr. Richards, you're 2.5% in the common school. So it's a real conservative way to do it. So then our reserve account only has to make up that difference between 2.1 and 5%, if that's a spending policy or whatever. So if we have zero investment return, we got bigger problems than any of this. We're gonna have to have a different committee meeting. But I think, and then this is where I think, having sat on this committee for a while, the forecasts are never good. And I guess I've always thought that the best predictor of future performance is past performance, but I guess that's not the case anymore. And but if you look at the amount that the reduced spending policy, I don't know, I guess we're doing it to grow the corpus. It really contributes very little to the corpus. It's really that 1% severance that we got to somehow get back into savings. And I don't know how we do it when you're broke. I mean, we got to figure a way to do it. So anyway, I hope I answered your question. Thanks.
Representative Western, does that make sense?
And I think numerically it makes total sense that if we're not, it comes down to what we profile. If we're not profiling, if we're not including unrealized gains in there, I can fully appreciate that. I just, my concern is maybe the long-term sustainability of it, of not only just the next budget cycle, but in 2, 4, 6, 10 years. But I guess that's a whole nother discussion. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Senator Hicks. Oh, excuse me, Patrick, did you have a response to that question? Then I'll get to you, Senator Hicks. Mr. Fleming, rather.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Representative Western, one comment on that is, you're spot on that, and Speaker Harshman pointed it out, but the one thing that I just want to make sure that the committee understands on this is, well, first on the profiling of capital gains, he's, spot on. Unless you have a crystal ball, you just cannot do it. It's just not doable. But the one thing that I do want to make sure everyone understands is, from my leading comments, with interest rates so low, so we're buying coupons in the front end of 1/4 to 3/8%. So the possibility of a realized capital gain in the fixed income area is very, very small. So looking on a forward basis, saying, well, historically, and getting back to Speaker's comments, it's like, yes, we've typically been bailed out on this, but we're in a different environment here. We're talking about a very, very expensive equity market and a fixed income market that at 0% rates, the opportunity for realized gains is de minimis. And I just want to make sure everyone understands. And these funds, common school and higher ed, are in the interest focused funds. So these are the two, those type of funds are problematic in this sense when we're hoping that we'll get a realized capital gain in this type of interest rate environment.
Senator Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, I think Patrick summarized much better than what I was going to say. Past performance, I mean, this is why we use IFC, all the investment professionals, RVK, we spend millions. I think at some point in time, we should heed their advice that investment income is not going to be what it's been in the past. And I think, again, consistent with the philosophy of the Wyoming legislature in the past, as I think it would behoove us to take a much more conservative approach to the spending policy than what we're currently doing now. But just my thoughts, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Nicholas, did I see you waving your hand wanting to speak? Okay. Further comments? So as we're aware, the spending policy does begin to ratchet down, I believe, next year. I had that in front of me just a half a second ago.
Mr. Vice
Excuse
Chairman.
me, starting in 23 on the PMTF. And is that the continued desire of the committee? Senator Hicks?
No, that's not my desire. I would like to see it ratchet down to a quicker and at a lower level, but I don't know that I'll get anywhere with that. We had a couple of bills to that effect last year, and they never went anywhere. So I don't know if there's any utility. It seems like we have a desire to spend a lot of money right now that we know, based on professional advice, is not going to be there in the future. So no, that's not my desire, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, very good. Comments noted. Anything else?
I take it that means you don't want to raise it, Larry.
Mr. Chairman.
Speaker Harshman.
So as we look at this report, which we're basically going to change the date on, it sounds like, which is fine. But I think, Chairman Madden, when he used to chair this committee, he'd always put a page in the back, kind of the vision kind of piece to it. What's the next steps? And we've talked about a lot of next steps, I think, so, just, I don't know, do we want to include some of that stuff in the last page for the body? We talked about from working on these governance decisions, removing these investment restraints, and then the total return approach were the three that, I wrote down that Josh talked about, and there were more written from others, but basically let the body know we're working on this. This is a big topic now for us, how to get our funds working harder for us, and then really how to grow the corpus. I think we know growing the corpus is that extra 40% deposit. It's not the little 0.5% pay cut we're trying to give ourselves. That's a small potatoes compared to that other piece. So maybe there's a way we can bring those two together and compromise on it, where we can save, but we can also, not take, because I think the other piece of that spending policy is, there's a lot of ways to do investments. It's not just in a permanent trust fund. When you build a sewer system or the Madison Water Project or an elementary school, those are serious investments. And I think we want to grow the corpus, but do we also want to take a standard of living cut for some profile for 30, 40 years out? I don't know. I think that's kind of that balance we got to find. And I hear you. I mean, but maybe some kind of vision that we're still working on some of this stuff. Anyway, I just throw that out to the committee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any further discussion on that point? I think it's a really good point to include something that shows what our actions might be or what we're discussing and how we can move forward. So I don't know, Ms. Scott, if you can pull up some of the old reports as Speaker Harshman referenced from when Representative Madden was the chairman, and see what some of those final pages looked like that showed what a path forward or a vision forward, not really a path forward, but a vision for the future might look like, and maybe include something along those lines.
Mr. Vice Chairman, absolutely, I will be able to do that, and that's an excellent reflection of what the dialogue has been.
And Mr. Vice Chair,
Yep.
I like the idea of having a short synopsis of of the benefits of a total return and working towards it. If you look at the numbers on total return on the New Mexico fund, the Canadian fund, they're at 6 and 7% right now. So they're ahead of us by 4 or 5%. I mean, it's a long process to get there, but the if we were in that type of a fund management program right now, we would be okay with our spending policies. So I think that at least this is one avenue to kind of explain it to them, because this is the beginning of a long discussion. And so the sooner we start explaining it to folks, the more likely we'll have a receptive audience.
Representative Western.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just to piggyback on top of the good appropriations chair remarks, I mean, if we're hitting 7%, 7.5%, and the SPA is 4% or 5%, that's an extra 2 to 3% extra that we get to throw in the bank, which, I mean, that's not insignificant money. That's a lot of money. So I think the dollars and cents benefit would be tremendous if we can, if we can eat the cake and the crumbs too in this kind of scenario. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Very good. So that'll be, Ms. Scott, that'll be great if you could include some of that information. And I think Representative Nicholas's points are spot on, that this is the beginning point of a long educational process for the rest of the members of the legislature and people of Wyoming for that matter. So thank you for including that.
Yes, Mr. Vice Chairman, I will do so.
Speaker Harshman.
So, Mr. Chairman, maybe the committee, and I don't know if it takes a motion or what, that would give you and the chairman kind of the latitude to kind of include that vision statement on that last page. I'm looking at the committee here on screen. I mean, we've been talking about the same thing, and just, and I don't know if that needs a motion, but I think that'd be a good way to proceed. And then we don't have to sit here and make motions on a letter, and just let you and President Perkins kind of work it out.
Thank you for that.
Go move.
Senator Kinski.
Yeah, I guess I want to be a little bit careful exactly what we say then, if we're going to extend to the two chairmen the latitude.
Yes, sure.
Senator Kinski, can you speak up a little bit?
Yeah, is that better?
Barely.
Well, what the hell? What's going on? Is that better?
Much better.
All right. If we're delegating to the two chairmen what the outlines of this vision statement look like, it should be fairly generic. I've been listening. I've got great reservations about trying to move the inviolate funds to a total return policy. I like them being inviolate. I'm concerned about the circumstances under which we might move to total return, and how politicians of the future might end up snagging on to more than they really should or could. And so I want to be very careful. I rejected it out of hand, but as Treasurer Meyer talked about, well, you'd have to have a constitutional cap on the spending policy too. Some of those sideboards, I want to make sure that if we're putting a vision statement in there that contemplates a constitutional amendment to crack open the PMTF, that we're very cautious and measured in the approach as to what's said in that vision statement. I want it to be just that we've had the discussion. I don't want it to imply that somehow I'm on board with it until I understand more. Personally, I think we're just way too early on in the process to outline that as a vision for the others. I think it was clear from the discussion that there's a lot more information to be gathered, a lot more things to be found out. But if you want a vision statement, I'd keep it pretty generic.
Yeah, Mr. Vice Chair. And I wouldn't talk about a constitutional amendment, but that's not part of the discussion at this point. That's a long-term item, so I would agree.
Speaker Harshman.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree. I think, and maybe, Senator Kinski's right. I too am not too wild about taking the constitutional barriers off that fund at all. I mean, then what are you writing checks at Christmas for everybody? I mean, who knows where that could go? And makes me nervous, but I again would like to learn more, but maybe it's more even not necessarily the vision. Maybe that's the wrong word. Maybe it's just kind of these next steps. that we're looking at. And really, there's more than that, but the governance piece, the investment restraints we know about that we've self-imposed and the SLIB's imposed, and then that total return approach. And maybe there's a different way to crack that total return with a larger reserve accounts or whatever it might be. There might be another way to look at it. So anyway, I just think maybe next step so we can start informing the rest of the members. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Scott?
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Given that there are quite a few different comments and perspectives, perhaps a motion to finalize based on chairman approval would be helpful.
Okay. Anyone
So
want to make a
moved.
motion?
So moved.
Moved by Senator Kinski, seconded by Senator Garou. It's the motion really is to allow the chairman and co-chairman to work on that next steps, kind of a finalized summary page, not to include any discussion of a constitutional amendment change, but to really just discuss various concepts and ideas that could be incorporated to allow our money to, the state's money to work harder and investments to work harder, and show the body that we didn't just meet and visit, but we met and came up with some ideas to pursue further as we go into the future. Treasurer Meyer.
Yeah, and I would hope that, that we kind of look at the idea of the low hanging fruit, and part of that is in the Josh brought up, and I think I alluded to, and Patrick to a certain degree too, is the obstacles, and the biggest one being the zero to low zero and negative interest rate atmosphere that we're in. I think that's the one biggest obstacle that we have in front of us. It's kind of a double-edged sword, because if interest rates go up, the gains that we had in our fixed income, they're going to actually be negative. So we've got that's the biggest challenge. The governance thing, we've gone down that road quite a ways already with the IFC. If you look at some of the details, it's just necessarily renaming some of the things that we've done already in rearranging the deck chairs. There's a couple of things that SLIB would have to give up to allow Patrick to have essentially the same authorization in different areas as Sam Masudi and the WRS. They weren't willing to give it up the last time. I don't know whether they'll be willing to give it up this time. But and to I guess to echo both the senator and the representative about the heartburn that's out there about taking off the protections of the inviolate corpus. Man, that thing has to be done right, or it could be a total disaster. So, yeah. All right. Thank you, guys.
Yes, sir. Okay, with that, is there further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, a thumbs up in the camera or a hands up. Okay. All those opposed? One in opposition, all others in favor of, and so that motion passes. Okay, moving on to the next item. I don't think there's anything further on that. Ms. Scott, do we need to approve the policy itself as well? We approved an idea for a summary page or a going forward page, but the rest of the summary report, does it need approved?
Mr. Vice Chairman, I do not believe so. It's really a history of what's gone on with the spending policy back to 2000, which is why I think we tend to keep it, because it is helpful, and it's really just the last page, but the committee can approve it if they would like to do that.
I don't think we need to, just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing something. Is the committee okay with it as it is? If so, through a nod of the head, we'll call it consensus and move forward. Not seeing anyone.
Mr. Chairman.
Ian?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate it. The committee has voted on that in the past, and because it's required, I think it might be appropriate to take a motion on that.
Okay. Okay, with that, would someone on the committee like to make a motion for the approval of the spending policy?
So moved.
Senator Kinski moved it. Is there a second? Representative Schwartz is the second. Is there any discussion? We've had a great discussion thus far, but certainly open for more. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor, a thumbs up or a hand up in front of the screen would be great. Okay. All those opposed, same thing, a hand in front of the screen. One in opposition, all others in favor of, and so that passes almost unanimously. Okay. Anyone need a break? We can take a quick break or we can power on. Committee, what would you like to do?
Rock and roll.
Okay, we'll continue. Senator Hicks, is that a 5-minute break? Okay, a 5-minute break. So it's 2:55. We'll come back at 3 o'clock. Aaron, you're not muted. I'm just waiting for more folks to turn on their screens so we know we have a quorum.
Yes, sir, Mr. Vice Chair, or co-chair, sorry.
Looks good. Looks like we've got most of the group back. So with that, we will go ahead and continue. And we are discussing draft legislation now, and this is LSO 0161, Working Draft Point 3, PMTF Reserve Account Distribution and Timing. And I believe Mr. Shaw will be presenting this to us. So take it away, Ian.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
Oh, yes, Senator Kinski, I'm sorry.
Yeah, just a point of order. So we took a break just shortly before the result, we took a vote just shortly before the break. I thought that was, what was that on? I thought it was on this bill.
No, sir, it was on the spending policy. It was on the spending policy, which was a document that we were looking through that has several charts in it, or the flow charts in it.
And we decided we were going to put a visioning statement in there of some kind.
On that document, correct.
Okay. All right. I just want to
or a next steps, maybe not a vision, but next steps.
Next steps. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So now we're looking at a working draft. If we decide to move forward with it, this will actually be a roll call vote at that point if we decide to sponsor it.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hicks.
Just for my edification, my understanding is the vote was actually to make a recommendation to continue the current spending policies as they are today. Is that not correct?
You are correct. The vote was on that document that we were looking at, and in that document it says they stay as they are today. And going forward, they will not be changed. There will be no increase or decrease in the spending policy. Secondly, there was another vote that was taken to add one more page to that document that is a next steps type of a page.
Okay, that's the way I recollect it. I just wanted to make sure that I'm on the right side of history on both of those. So anyway, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You are on the right side of history, and we're glad to see that you're staying awake and keeping us in the House on our toes. Very good. And with that, we are working on a bill draft regarding the PMTF reserve account distribution and timing. And so with that, Mr. Shaw, take it away, and you've got the floor.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Appreciate it. This is 21 LSO 161 version 0.3. It was shared with each of you and is in our committee packet. Mr. Chairman, would you prefer as I go through it to share my screen, or would you rather not do that?
I think sharing your screen would be great.
Okay, I'll do that now. As the committee might remember, we took a vote, the committee took a vote on this bill at its last meeting after a discussion of use of the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund reserve account to fund the 2.5 guarantee into the permanent for expenditure each year. Let me get this up to share it with you. Naturally, it's never as easy as when you just practice it right before the live. That's how that usually works.
Right. And members, the vote was taken to have the bill drafted. The vote was not to approve the bill for introduction to the legislature, just for drafting purposes. We voted on that.
Very good. Let me make sure I have the right one up here.
And then, Mr. Shaw, the next challenge is if you can enlarge that slightly.
Okay, very good. I appear to have lost it on my screen here. Just 1 minute. Not sure why it went away, but it did. Polly or Karen, can you get that up for me? Because I'm actually having a problem with my internet now. I took it the version that was on the website to make sure the line numbers matched. Odd. Okay, very good. Thank you. The committee is.
Can you enlarge that, Karen?
Thank you, Karen. Appreciate it.
Fantastic. Thank you. Mr. Shaw,
committee,
the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The committee did vote to have this drafted last meeting. There was some discussion about tips from use of the reserve account to fund the spending, 2.5% of the spending policy to the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund. The issue is the timing of those distributions. When the fund doesn't create enough to fund the spending policy amount, that 2.5 is guaranteed. In past years, there hasn't been enough earnings to make that happen. So, in the past year. And so those tips were taken from the reserve account. Now, typically that has been done once a year. The problem is with the general fund getting reduced to the extent it has, the Treasurer's Office decided to make those distributions more frequently to provide the cash flow that was necessary. The question was whether that's clear in the statute. They interpreted that it was, and I don't think LSO had any problem with that interpretation, but the committee decided to make it more clear in statute. So that's hence this legislation. There were three options that the committee discussed. One was to move the payments from an annual payment to a quarterly payment and just simply make it a quarterly payment. The other was to try to insert sort of a trigger, a hard trigger, where statutorily it would define what conditions would need to exist to cause the distributions to be made more frequently. And then finally, the option was to make it quarterly by default, but allow some flexibility with the Treasurer's Office to then make the distribution more frequently or less frequently depending on the circumstances. It was that option that was voted by the committee, but this bill provides the other options as well. So moving to page 2, this is an amendment to 94719B, which provides for this distribution. On line 3, it makes that distribution into a standard quarterly distribution. But then in the larger language on lines 9 through 20, it provides for flexibility. It requires this treasurer with the SLIB to analyze the circumstances and to provide for more frequent or less frequent distributions, but not less than annual distributions. I can go through that specific language if you want, but that's what it provides for. It also provides some clarity. In line 9, it takes out the word annually because it's repetitive and makes some confusion there. It also provides on line 1 on page 2 that these tips are only going to happen, the transfer is only going to happen to the extent the funds are available. On page 3 of the draft, on page 2 is the entire substantive language that would exist in option number 1. Page 3 and page 4 provide other options that this committee wanted to consider. The first of those options is the simple quarterly distribution. This simply says that these distributions will be made on a quarterly pro rata basis and then maintains the other clarifying changes that were in the prior language. On page 4 then, is the other option. This option, Don Richards and I and the fiscal staff worked on this a little bit to try to come up with some ideas of what would be an appropriate hard trigger. And what we came up with is the idea presented here, and that is that anytime that the general fund and budget reserve account balances in any quarter are less than the combined amounts that were in those accounts in the prior quarter, it would trigger more frequent distributions. That is to say, if you look at what just happened and look at your current balance, if it looks like you're going to run into a deficit in that coming quarter, then you'd get a quarterly distribution. I will say that we've had some discussions about the adequacy of that tip and that trigger. And the problem, and it's actually already been discussed today, Polly's graphs, and the committee already discussed it in some amount of detail, the fact that during any one quarter, the distributions from the general fund or the budget reserve account are not very consistent. Some quarters they might be high, some quarters they might be low. It might be that just after a quarter, you're going to get a big withdrawal. And so there are some issues with the timing of this trigger point. We haven't contemplated a better option for these, but there are some issues with timing and whether or not, allowing that quicker distribution timing would be adequate when it happens after the fact. In section 2 of the bill is an attempt to recognize that during this past year, statutory language was interpreted to allow the more frequent transfers in any event. And we, I think, wanted to make sure that this legislature established that we're not changing policy by adopting any of this language, and we're not trying to make any judgment on the past practices, but rather are clarifying the language. And we decided this was good language to do that. And finally, the act is effective on page 5, section 3 on July 1st, 2021. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, committee questions. As he said, there's 3 options. Treasurer Meyer, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to explain something we did last year that actually will probably make us an extra 50 basis points across all our funds. And it's a very simple thing. I looked at it and I thought it was ridiculous for us to rebalance every 30 days. Partly because it costs you every time you buy or sell something. And the other part is that if you had winners, you were selling them and you had less to operate on for the next 30 days and the next 30 days. So we had RBK do an analysis, and we can make more money if we rebalance our portfolio either on a 6-month or quarterly basis. SLIB decided to say that it was quarterly, and that's when we're rebalancing. I bring that up because if we want to do it more frequently, do these distributions more frequently than quarterly, then there really won't be too much to actually distribute, in those interim months after the quarter, except for maybe a few dividends or a little bit of interest, where on the quarters we'll have the good possibility of some realized capital gains. So if it just seems that the quarterly ones match up a lot better with what we're doing with investing. They match up a lot better with the analysis that RBK did for us that will give us the highest possible return as far as the frequency of rebalancing. And that's basically the analysis that I would bring to the discussion here. And I'll leave it at that.
I'd muted myself. Deputy Williams. Then I'll get to you, Senator Hicks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to clarify our understanding, the Treasurer's Office. We currently do monthly distributions. Well, these are the distributions of the FMRs, and I might be confusing this. We do not normally ask the SLIB for permission or approval to make our distributions, and I was wondering if I might get some clarity on why that step is added. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, who would be best suited to answer that? Mr. Shaw, you might remember what we said.
Mr. Chairman, really, it's a to some extent, I think the committee hadn't made a firm decision on that. I think that issue is completely up to your discretion. I don't think it is necessarily required. There was some discussion about not leaving it to one entity, but on some level of coordination, and that's the reason that language is there.
Mr. Chairman.
Treasurer Meyer.
Yeah. And these aren't FMRs, I don't believe. These are actually income distributions from the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So that's the FMRs are one thing that we, as Don said, we do that monthly.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Deputy Williams.
apologize for the confusion. When we brought this up with the issue of cash flow management, it was encompassing of all of these distributions, and we wanted the clarity of language that would allow us to be able to not just interpret it as an annual. Right now, we interpret it as an annual basis at the end of the year. We don't think that there's anything against us making more frequent distributions. We had just discussed with LSO the possibility of some clarity in the language. And right now, we don't, again, go through SLIB, and I would respectfully request that we not be asked to do that, because it just adds another layer of bureaucracy and complexity, timing. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your consideration.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to clarify the bill a little bit, is that on page 2, you will see that the primary option here would change it to quarterly distributions. And then the only time they would have to make any contact with SLIB about that issue would be if they wanted to adjust that timing to either make it more frequent or less frequent. Just wanted to make that clear.
Senator Hicks, you had a question, then I'll get to you, Treasurer Meyer.
I'm going to pass, Mr. Vice Chairman.
Okay, Treasurer Meyer.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess we just spent about 2 hours about best management practices, and right at the top of the list is independence between the investment office and the treasurer's office and other branches of government. And here we go. I have to agree with my deputy that adding another layer of Mother May Eyes just defeats that whole purpose. And so that's frustrating in that regard. The language at the bottom of from after state on line 16 into the bottom of that, I really don't have any problems with that. That takes into account the investment policies and adjusting the timing in the general fund accordingly. And it's not less than annually, so it allows us to do quarterly or I think maybe the way to make it up in line 3 is to look at it as I'll stop there because it's just the frequency of it. It's just the I think we're capable of looking at the cash flows and helping the state out and however they can, and necessarily don't need the SLIB to tell us, and but just give us the flexibility to help you guys when we need to put some money in there. I think that's all we really need to do.
I think we're all digesting these various options and comments. So,
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Chairman Perkins.
Thank you. So,
President Perkins.
Mr. Chairman, as you look at this, I mean the real substantive part of this, not option 1, but if you just go to page 2 of the drafted document, particularly on line 9, all here is you're saying instead of annually, it's going to go to quarterly. And if it's going to be more frequently, then the treasurer consults with the State Loan Investment Board. And so it doesn't even require the treasurer to have permission. It just basically requires notification. But ultimately what it is, it gives him, only if he departs, if the treasurer were to distribute more frequently than quarterly, the way I read it is that's the only time that the state treasurer would be required to consult at all. So as we as you look at that, that's a pretty low bar. Doesn't seem to require much other than, I think that there's a few others. I know the governor always has an interest in it, as does the treasurer on making sure they've got their cash flow, what they need coming up. But anyway, that's, as I look at that, unless we go on and adopt the more restrictive items in option 1 or option 2, it seems to me that it's a pretty straightforward and not unhelpful policy the way that it's written on, particularly on page 2. Am I missing something, Ian?
Mr. Chairman, no, I think that's accurate.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Kinski and then Senator Hicks.
Yeah, I wonder if I could get Dawn to circle back to something she said, which is, I thought what she said is it wasn't really clear that they couldn't do it anyway, that there was nothing that really necessarily mandated annual, but that they thought it would be good to ask for a bill. Now you got a bill that maybe you might not want when we get all done with it. Tell me a little bit more about why you feel it's necessary to have a bill at all.
Mr. Chairman? Mr. Chairman, may I go ahead?
Deputy Williams, yes.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Senator Kinski. It says not less than annually, so it doesn't really, the current language says that. So it doesn't really say that we couldn't do it in the first month of the year or the last month of the year. And so in order to make a change that has been something the way the office has always done it at the end of the year, we just thought, while it's not required, it would be more clear and that it would remove any questions potentially from anyone looking at the situation to say, why are you making distributions now as opposed to the end of the year? We always do it at the end of the year kind of thing. And this was simply a suggestion to avoid those kinds of uncertainties. And unfortunately, we didn't mention the SLIB part. So I guess you have to be careful what you ask for, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hicks.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, there's always that thing out there, isn't it? Be careful what you ask the barbarians to do. I'm worried about the logistical timeframes of these. When we reference SLIB, that means, in my opinion, when they're sitting in their official capacity. And maybe somebody can enlighten me as to whether their quarterly meetings align before or after the fiscal quarter, or is there a logistical problem by putting that language in there? Anybody know when do they meet relative to the fiscal quarters that this bill anticipates distributions, before or after? Or would this then require SLIB to have an additional meeting above and beyond their normal quarterly meetings?
Ian, can you answer that possibly?
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, I don't know. I can find out right away, though, what their regular meeting schedules are. I think that to the extent they didn't line up appropriately, which they might not, I fear, they would likely have to take a formal action to recommend it, although the language isn't entirely clear. It says they must consult. Luckily, Dawn Richards is advising me that they meet in the first month of each quarter. And so that would be the timing. That, of course, if they meet at in the beginning of each quarter, that the trigger mechanisms and some of the other things would be a little more tricky. But here, they likely would have to take a formal vote on the motion at their meeting, though.
Mr. Chairman, just to follow up on that, when we use the terminology SLIB, that means the 5 top electeds sitting in their official capacity as the State Land and Investment Board. So even when we say consult, it has to be in their official capacity, the State Land and Investment Board, which means it would be at a formal meeting, not as an informal consultation as their capacity as the other 4 top elected. So I do think that timing becomes a little bit of an issue as far as the way that the current bill is worded. Mr. Chairman, you're muted.
Meyer.
Yep.
I'm wondering if, maybe we could say inform SLIB, because there's a process to get an item placed before the top 5 elected officials. You have to get on their docket. You have to make sure you're there, in time enough for the State Loan and Investment Board to make sure that it's printed and that there's public notice and all of those different things that go along with it. And I can tell you after going till, after 11 o'clock at the last SLIB meeting, that this one might not have made it to the last item of the agenda at 11 o'clock, at 11:15 at night. So I'm there's some things I think that are extremely important that need to be, gone over with the SLIB in their regular course of business. That I guess I don't know whether this is one of them. We're not adverse to, reporting or informing, anybody that we need to report to or inform, but that the good senator from Carbon County did bring up I think a point that should have some due consideration.
Very good. Representative Furphy. Representative Furphy, and then I'll get to you, President Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted the treasurer's input on, since he's a member of the SLIB, if we made an amendment on page 2 and line 9 and 10, just to say the treasurer shall then eliminate consult with the State Loan and Investment Board 2, and then the state it would read, so the state treasurer shall determine if quarterly transfers should be made more frequently. Once again, since he's a member of SLIB, he's going to have input from them anyway. So I just throw that out for discussion and comment.
President Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think that, at the end of the day, the consulting thing may be a little bit, for the things that the treasurer said, I think it might be a little bit onerous. I think Senator Hicks made a good point. But I do think that at the end of the day, with this, what I heard today was that we've started a policy of rebalancing quarterly. That should tie up nicely with these kind of quarterly distributions. To do it quarterly, the treasurer's not required to notice anybody. If he's going to do it more quarterly, if he's going to do it more frequently than quarterly, then there's been something that's changed. It seems to me that there would be something that has changed. They're trying to move the quarterly rebalancing instead of every 30 days. There'll be some reason that there's going to be a change. And so I'm fine with, I think consult may be a little bit too onerous, but ultimately we can provide notice. And I think they can provide notice simply by providing notice to the State Loan and Investment Board, through the OLSI. And if we did that, Mr. Treasurer, do you think that would take care of most of your concerns?
Well, I think it would, from my perspective. Don works on this on more of a day-to-day basis, but I think that we can certainly report to the SLIB, and I would say that we can, and I guess in making that determination on that, we would probably be getting a hold of the budget office or anybody else, or the auditor and the people that we work with on a daily basis, there's a good chance they'd be calling us up and saying that looks like we're going to get short, So, Mr. Chairman, can we have Don opine on this and see whether that works with how she does the day-to-day over there?
Certainly, Deputy Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. So we have two things that we're talking about. We're talking about quarterly rebalancing, and we're talking about distributions of earnings. And really, they're two separate things. We're not doing distributions based on rebalancing. So I just kind of wanted to clear that up. So yes, I suppose the question is that that's fine. I mean, we'll manage.
She's easy to get, guys.
No, wait, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, yes, go ahead, President Perkins.
Thank you. So I appreciate that, Don. What I thought I heard was that the treasurer had said that used to rebase every 30 days or so, and that by rebasing quarterly, that you're going to make about 52 more basis points this year. And then I thought I heard the treasurer say that actually if we were making distributions on a quarterly basis, that it would fit nicely. It would fit a little bit more nicely with that whole process. And so while I understand that rebalancing you don't just rebalance, you have distributions, it seems to me that they're not necessarily disassociated, in that if you're going to distribute revenues of income or revenues of some sort, there has to have been either some harvesting of capital gains or obviously receipt of interest or dividends. So are we missing something? And are we missing something? Because I don't want to go down here and think that we've got some things that are at least a little bit related when they aren't related at all.
Okay. Sorry, go ahead.
Deputy Williams, go ahead.
Well, go ahead, Don. You're recognized.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So what I would like to defer to the treasurer.
Very good, Treasurer Meyer.
Oh, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Senator Perkins, they are related to the extent that the rebalancing takes place on an off month before the normal quarter. We did that for a couple of reasons, but the biggest reason is that sometimes it's hard to get the right bid offer spread when you're right on the quarter, because there's a lot of other people trying to hit that window. So we offset our redistributions by to make sure that we could get in there and do our business without any market interference. And so that money will be available, in a timely manner, so we can make those redistributions on a quarterly basis. What the point I was trying to make, that if we did it more frequently, there would be a diminished amount of gains that would be distributed in those other 2 months that weren't directly behind the rebalancing. So there wasn't a lot of gain by doing it every month versus quarterly. So you would have larger months every quarter, and then those distributions would drop down in the second 2 months, and then they'd go back up in the next quarter. And so that would kind of how your bar chart would look. But I guess it hopefully the extra 50 points that we're planning on getting should go ahead and fund that $100+ million that you guys normally have, and everything should be Jake if we keep our spending in line. Does that make sense, Mr. Chairman, Senator? Okay, All right.
Further questions or comments? Mr. Richards, would there be a situation where there would be a need, a cash flow need to distribute funds more regular than quarterly, or through reserve funds and forecasting, should they be able to predict at least 3 months spending and not run into a need to do it any more regular than quarterly? Based on your guesstimate, best guesstimate.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I think it's useful to go back and realize how this originated. And historically, all treasurer's offices have distributed this annually. What this means is about $190 million that is earned this year will be distributed to the general fund on or about June 30th. At the very last day or last week, depending on when the treasurer's office does it, of the fiscal year, which doesn't really give an opportunity to use those funds during the fiscal year. We were actually asked to look at this LSO by the governor's office, and then we worked with the state auditor's office and the state treasurer's office in developing this when we thought we were going to run out of cash in this fall. And we were identifying when the timing of a potential special session would need to occur. There is, getting to your question now, there is a trade-off between how much is too much administratively. And we're only talking about one transfer, the transfer from the PMTF reserve account to the general fund, which is a guaranteed to the extent funds are available. And there is a cost of making monthly transfers. And so I think that's where the quarterly was more of a staff decision. It was something more than annual, so we avoid this $180 million deposit on June 30th that can't really be used during the fiscal year. To monthly would be perhaps a bit excessive in terms of administration of doing that every month. So it's certainly a policy choice. I don't think you would benefit one way or the other, monthly or quarterly, in terms of our projections.
So to follow that up, then we could simplify the bill and say annually, unless cash flow needs are net such that it would be done on a quarterly basis, and eliminate all the other language. Is that a reasonable fix?
Yes, and I think that's the page 3, option 1. That's the simplest option that is available. It's to the extent quarterly, you could say to the extent annually. It doesn't require any reviews or anything like that. There was some discussion, not with the current elected officials, but one elected official will literally control the outcome for other elected officials. So the state treasurer's decision to go quarterly or annually will directly affect what the state auditor is able to pay and what the state governor must cut. All of that, trickles down. If the governor doesn't have sufficient revenues, he has to cut programs. So that's the discussion as to, or the balance of the policy between makers.
Thank you for that history, Mr. Richards. Certainly appreciate it. Further discussion on the bill. What would the committee like to do with this bill? Is anyone on the committee still awake? Or still just digesting all the various options and thoughts here?
Mr. Chairman.
Move the bill.
I would move, never mind. Second.
Representative Harshman moves the bill and Senator Kinski seconded it.
Now, is there a question as to which option we're moving?
That was my next question to ask, Senator Kinski. You beat me to the punch. So which option is being moved?
Chairman, I'm just moving the original draft, and then I figure if representatives and senators want to amend option 1 or 2 or parts. So the motion that I'd make is just the original draft, page 1 and 2, over to page 3, and then you can see where the options 1 and 2 roll in there.
Perfect. Thank you for clarifying.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Kinski.
I would move to amend on page 2, line 10, to say the treasurer shall notify the State Loan Investment Board. Striking consult.
Consult deleted, insert notify is your motion.
Well, strike consult with and insert notify.
Correct.
Has to come out, yeah.
Representative Nicholas and then Representative Schwartz.
I presume there's a second. Is there a second?
Second by Senator Guru on that. So now
Okay,
Representative Nicholas.
I speak against the motion. Frankly, folks, first of all, I don't think we know enough about what we're doing to vote on it. But from the comments from Mr. Richards just 30 seconds ago, what we're doing is giving the treasurer the authority to take some actions that will affect both the auditor and the governor and in their operations of state government. Why would we do that without having their input about this and what the impacts are? So I just think that we're premature to do that. So I think it's better to go with the existing language until we have more information in front of us.
Representative Schwartz.
Mr. Chairman.
Oh, follow up?
Well, point of order, I'm curious, did we intend to kick the bill out of here or just to get it in final shape and then await for input from the other electeds, top electeds, which is what I'd like to do. I'd like to get the form of a bill, know that we're prepared to support it, but then wait and get the feedback.
Well, currently, we have no meeting scheduled after today.
Oh.
And Management Council allotted us 2 one-day meetings. We certainly have not spent all of our budget. However, we would have to ask Management Council for a 3rd meeting if we wanted to do that.
No, we don't.
My thought was originally we would kick this bill out of here today in a final form. And then, as we all know, if there's something that comes up that we dislike, leadership doesn't necessarily have to bring it up during the session. But we would our committee would do its final work on it today, was my intent.
I'd call for the question on my amendment.
President Perkins, excuse me, Representative Schwartz was ahead of you, President Perkins. So Representative Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a language issue with the bringer of the motion, because if you change line 10, it would appear to me line 11 needs to be changed as well.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Shaw, would you clarify?
I will clarify. Yes, I do think I would be able to easily make the requirement that they consult with SLIB. I'm sorry, that they notify SLIB. I might suggest that it just be a separate sentence that should they change the timing other than quarterly, they have an obligation to notify SLIB. Would likely go at the end of that new language. I don't know if the bringer of the motion is open to that. I just suggested it may be.
No, I'm open to, I'll accept that as a friendly amendment if the second does as well.
So that will be the new amendment. There really no such thing as a friendly amendment, but the intent is the same here. So that Mr. Shaw recognizes where he would insert the language notifying the SLIB board. As the intent, the concept has not changed. So we'll proceed with that in a conceptual form. President Perkins.
Thank you. I want to go back to Bob's Representative Nicholas's comment. What I thought I heard Don Richards say was that the treasurer has this kind of authority if he's able to. It's the timing of the distribution that enables the treasurer to have this. Whether or not he or she would ever use it is a whole nother question, but it's the timing of the distribution that gives that authority the power. I thought that's what I heard what Don Richards said. And by moving to quarterly to a minimum of quarterly distributions, it would reduce that by having those distributions available throughout the fiscal year, as opposed to potentially, for whatever reason, the treasurer might delay those distributions till the end because they didn't agree with a policy decision in one of the other offices. You know, I don't see Treasurer Meyer ever doing that. I don't know that we've had a lot of trouble with that in the past, but I thought that this helped resolve that very issue that Don was talking about. Did I hear that backwards?
Mr. Richards, would you kindly clarify?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Perkins, Representative Nicholas, I think the current law allows the state treasurer to do that, but they wanted clarification of that authority. This bill would clarify and require the, to the extent funds available, the transfer would occur quarterly rather than annually. I'm sure there could be a situation where more or less frequently could result in concerns, but I can't reasonably envision a case that monthly is going to be necessary. So moving that quarterly down. If you had a treasurer who was set on making things difficult under the proposed language and make it annual rather than quarterly, yes, that would affect the operations of the state auditor's office and the governor.
That being said, as long as the treasurer is willing to work with the other branches of government or the other members, then those issues don't arise. It's only if a treasurer at some point in the future wanted to be difficult.
Mr. Chairman, yes, that was my goal here, and I'm not suggesting any of the personalities currently are in that situation.
Very good. Any further discussion, Treasurer Meyer?
No, the only time that I could ever envision that you might, as the treasurer's office might, and there's some language in there, if less frequent transfers would be better, meet the state's investment policies. And let's take, for example, let's say you've got 2 good quarters and you make the distributions are quarterly. And then in the third quarter, kind of like this year, stock market drops 43%, CLOs drop 60%. Everything just falls down to next to nothing. You know, that might be, I guess, reason to stop and pause and say, well, are you going to make the third quarter distribution? You know, and so that's the only place that I could see that would could possibly be interrupted. But as I think Don said, that we're just looking at the guaranteed part, you know, that's actually guaranteed. So that may not even come into play in an area like that, because you've got your guaranteed reserve funds that you're just distributing. So, you know, I can't, you know, because it's just those guaranteed funds. Yeah, I don't see that happening even in circumstances like that, Mr. Chairman. Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Shaw, could you, Representative Nicholas.
So I'm sorry, I keep reading this language and I'm thinking of someone looking at this statute 10 years from now and going, why in the world is this language in this statute like this? And it doesn't make sense to me. But if you look at that line 16 and 17, if the state treasurer decides that it's better for the investment policies, in other words, if he can make more money or will lose less money, then he can change it up to a year versus quarterly, then he can do it at his sole discretion. To me, that doesn't make sense in terms of the distribution of the 2.5%.
Very good. Mr. Shaw, would you remind us what the proposed amended language would say and where it would read in?
Certainly. Mr. Chairman, thank you. On line 9 and 10 on page 2, the language, and I'll read it all together. It would say, the treasurer shall determine, so I'm skipping to line 11, the treasurer shall determine if the quarterly transfers to the general fund should be made more frequently, blah, blah, blah. Then down at the end on line 20, after the word annually, it would say the treasurer shall inform the State Loan and Investment Board through OCLI of any changes in the timing of transfers other than quarterly transfers.
Senator Kinski, that meets your intent, correct? I think, Senator Kinski?
Well, my image is frozen. Can you hear my voice?
I can hear your voice, yes, sir. Does that meet your intent?
It does. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so that was the conceptual amendment was made by Senator Kinski, written in quite nicely by Mr. Shaw. And with that, Senator Hicks.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, for clarification, are we leaving all of the current language, the new language in line 9, 10, and 11 that he still has to consult with? I thought that, no. So what happened? Where do we strike that? Where do we stop the strike on that?
Mr. Shaw, please clarify.
Mr. Chairman, we would strike on line 10, consult with the state loan and we strike on page 11, investment board 2. So now those 3 lines would read, the treasurer shall determine if the quarterly transfers.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Follow up, Senator Hicks, or you're clear now? Okay. Any further discussion on this proposed amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor, raise your hand to the screen. One, two, three, four. Okay, 5. Okay, all those opposed, raise your hand. I saw 5 there on the screen. And I'm voting no, and I see 4 there. So I think that passes. 5-4. Senator Coe did not vote. Okay, moving on. Further amendments. Further amendments? Representative Schwartz?
It's more of a question, but I mean, I guess actually what I would say is I would amend to take out, starting on line 9, the word the, and remove all the way down to annually, because I thought the whole intent originally was just to clarify that quarterly distributions were okay, that there was some doubt about whether that was what the statute wanted. So why are we doing more than just adding the language on lines 1 through 4? And maybe I'm just confused.
Mr. Chairman.
That's seconded by, if that's a motion, Representative Schwartz, it's been seconded by Representative Nicholas. Senator Kinski? So the motion is to delete the new language, the red language from line 9 through line 20, including the amendment that was just passed. So Senator Kinski?
So I just want to make sure that, clarify with the bringer of the amendment that you want to give the treasurer the authority to make those changes, those distribution changes without any notification to the other members of the SLIB board? Or are you saying it would be locked in that it has to be on a quarterly basis?
Representative Schwartz?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Kinski, yeah, I'm just saying, let's do it on a quarterly basis. It's simple, and we're not going to have to deal with all of these potential issues.
Mr. Shaw, would you clarify anything we're misinterpreting?
No, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I just wanted to let you know that that is the first option on page 3. So you can see that contextually in the text. That was the option. The first option is simple quarterly distribution.
Senator Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, I was just going to make that point. Representative Schwartz is that Ethan just made. That's already, you just need to add the language that you see on page 3 to make that work. So
further discussion on this proposed amendment? And really, it's just changing the bill to option number 1, but you can look at it however you would like. It accomplishes the same task. Any further discussion? Mr. Treasurer or Deputy Williams, do you have any?
Mr.
President Perkins.
Thank you. I guess I do have the thing that the action we just took a minute ago before we started down this was we said that we had moved to quarterly distributions except when we didn't. And whenever it's in the investment, whenever the Treasury determines it's in the investment policy of the state to have less frequent, but in any event, it'll be annually. So I mean, I understand what Chairman Nicholas was saying was that, Mr. Chairman, was that, we did it and then we basically left a big hole there for that to change again. And so, we can fix that one of two ways, and maybe this is just the easiest way. If we want to move to quarterly distributions, maybe this is just the way to do it, just adopt one, and in doing so, I think we would naturally go back and strike what we just did. But that's probably easier than going back or we continue to go back and work on the language that we just did and end up in the same place. But we did a funny thing there. We said that we would go quarterly distributions except when we don't.
Mr. Fleming, a question for you. Moving to a quarterly distribution, will that have a significant impact on revenues that are generated through investment?
Mr. Chairman, I do not believe so.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Kinski.
I'm not really hard set either way. When Speaker Harshman made the motion, I was almost inclined to go to option 1, but I'm intrigued by the thought, and perhaps the treasurer can help me. The part that I like about the language you've got there now, it says more than just we'll be quarterly except when we're not. It says if the treasurer determines that quarterly or more frequent transfers are not necessary to meet the cash flow obligations, and less frequent transfers would better meet the state's investment policy. So I thought what the treasurer had said is there may be circumstances where you really would rather not distribute quarterly, you'd rather let it ride, and you may be passing up some choice investment returns by just blindly going quarterly when you don't need it for cash flow purposes. And maybe I misunderstood. Perhaps Mr. Fleming or the treasurer could retrace that for me.
Mr. Chairman.
Treasurer Meyer.
Yeah, at the I guess the current status of the way we're restricted in our shop, it probably doesn't make a lot of difference because we can't necessarily reinvest that fund. It just sits in the cash account. If at any time when we can have, I guess a total return fund, then that might make a lot of sense to carry all those funds over to the end of the year, because you could reinvest them back into equities or reinvest them in other things, if we didn't have limitations on our asset allocation like a lot of funds do. I guess that's kind of the problem we get in when we start getting into details in the statute. Because this one here, if we do get a total return fund that we have that freedom to invest, we'd have to come back in and probably revisit it and put in the language that was in the option that this option 1 is replacing. So that's Is the language perfect in the first rendition? You know, I can't say that it is. It does give us some optionality if at any time we get a total return system where we can reinvest the income until it's actually needed. This is a simple way to do it. I'm sure that we can probably manage. Dawn can tell us if we can't, but I'm sure that she'll say that we can do it. And it is clear, it's unambiguous, but it does lack the optionality if we ever get this changed. But if we get it changed, we'll write this one down. We'll get to a total return concept that gives Patrick the optionality to invest all the the harvested income throughout the year. Then we'll have to go back and revisit it.
So, Mr. Chairman,
Senator Kinski, follow up.
my takeaway from that is that they're not really hard set on the language that we've rewritten, and option one ought to be just fine. Then that's my takeaway from that conversation.
Further discussion? Further discussion? Seeing none, we will proceed to vote on this amendment. Everyone recognizes what it is. It's essentially inserting option one as this would be the bill now, and it takes away the language, all the other clarifying language or additional language, and it just says the distributions will happen on a quarterly basis. Everyone's clear on that? All those in favor, raise your hand to the screen. Okay, all those opposed, raise your hand. Okay, that is a 1, 2, 3. So that passes 7 in favor, 3 against.
Question on the bill.
Question on the bill. Okay, with that, I think it will be a roll call vote. Ms. Scott, I believe you will be doing that.
No, sir. I will be
Karen.
taking care of the roll call vote.
Okay, very good. Karen, thank you. We're ready for a roll call vote.
Okay. On 21 LSO, excuse me, 0161 as amended, Senator Coe.
Aye.
Senator Guru.
Aye.
Senator Hicks.
Aye.
Senator Kinski.
Aye.
I assume Senator Agar is excused, correct?
Excused for Agar.
Thank you. Representative Furphy? I got a cough.
Representative Furphy, please repeat your vote.
Oop, he froze.
We'll get it in just a moment. Once he's unfrozen.
Sounds good. We'll move on to next. And
Speaker Harshman.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Representative Kirkbride.
Aye.
Representative Nicholas.
Aye.
Representative Schwartz.
Aye.
Representative Furphy.
Aye.
Thank you. Chairman Perkins.
Aye.
Vice Chairman Walters.
aye.
You have 11, pardon me. I was
11
correct.
ayes and
11
1
ayes
excused.
and 1 excused.
Yes. Very good. Thank you, committee. With that, I think any public comment, we have had none registered prior at any point prior to the day. Just wanted to double check with Karen. Nothing has came in.
No, sir, nothing has come in.
President Perkins, yes.
I've got to jump off. I've got some people here to give me some medical treatment, so I got to run. So talk to you later.
Thank you for joining us today and hope you feel well soon.
Thanks.
Okay, with that, Item number 18, Ms. Scott, committee discussion and approval of the spending policy report. I believe we did that earlier in the day. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I agree. That is correct. That was handled.
Okay, just wanted to make sure there was something I wasn't missing. And so with that, anything else from the committee? If not, I think we're close to ready to adjourn. Representative Nicholas, then Speaker Harshman.
Yeah, just, the working group still has another meeting or two that will take place. And whoever else wants to join us with that. But what I would like to do is just get permission from the chair to develop, if you will, some of the information that has been presented to us and that will be presented to us by the IFC. We asked them to come back and discuss with us membership, if they wanted to add or subtract, and so we may get a presentation on that. I asked them if to give comments on the current system of how we're setting up meetings and notices of meetings and the management of the meetings itself, and also the general managements of the treasurer's office and others in general. So I just want to make sure that those issues will be in front of the working group. What the working group will do is probably do some type of a report that goes out to the committee. Then the next issue that is likely to transpire is that if we end up going into session in, say, late April or May, we go back into session for one day, they'll give authority for the CAPFIN to meet as an interim committee in the next session. So the reconstituted committee, it's not improbable and it's possible that the working group will continue and meet after that, but we'll talk with whoever the chairs are at that time. But I just wanted to kind of bring that to the chair's attention and to the committee's attention, and if people want to participate, or if they, and I presume that we have the authority to continue to down this course that we've started on. So
I think that all sounds wonderful. Senator Kinski.
Yes, I was voluntold to another subcommittee this morning. I think it's the casino subcommittee is what I call it. And it was to try and move Office of State Lands along fairly quickly. And I would appreciate it if somebody, not me, would take one giant step forward and volunteer to put together some team meetings to get that process rolling along.
We will do that. We will do that. I've got a person in mind that'll be spearheading that.
Okay, thank you.
Representative or Speaker Harshman, excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good work today on the meeting. I guess on what Representative Nicholas was talking about. So now we've got two working groups working. I'm just wondering, what is it, the 16th of November? We still got a little time. Obviously, without travel, our budgets are in good shape. And I'm just throwing it out to you, Mr. Chairman, and President Perkins is off right now, but perhaps we want to keep that option open of maybe another meeting to consider some legislation from those working groups, maybe a half-day deal in December. And then it carries on to what Representative Nicholas talked about. We don't know yet. We're in that odd deal where the 65th is kind of planning for the 66th, but only the 66th can make decisions for themselves once that day comes in January. But given what's kind of going on, you can kind of see where maybe some of this is going. So we might have an early interim, January, February, March, April-ish. And as good Chairman of Appropriations said, but I think maybe we got 6 weeks. Maybe it'd be appropriate to have another little half-day meeting to knock a couple of these bills out. And maybe there's some more bills if you're going to take motions. I got one right now if you want. But anyway, that's my thought. I don't know if everybody's meetinged out already. I don't know, Mr. Chairman. Thoughts on that? Maybe discussion?
I think it would be good to request an additional half-day or day meeting from Management Council. And then if we don't need it, if the working groups don't come back with enough information prior to the end of the year to use it, that we just don't use it. But I think it's probably prudent to go ahead and request it at this point, and that way it would be available if needed. So Miss Scott or Ian, it would probably be one of you that would draft a letter to request that additional day.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman, we will do that. And we'll leave, if it's your direction, then we will leave the actual date unfilled out, but probably in December. Is that your wish?
That's perfect. Representative Schwartz.
Or we might have all January and February to meet.
Mr.
Senator
Chairman,
Kinski, we may, but that would be a new legislative body, and so we would have to have new appointments to this committee for those January, February meetings. Not to say that it's impossible, but
that's right.
That is
You're
the
right.
one hiccup there. So Representative Schwartz.
yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a clarification to the speaker, actually. Do I have the option to be meetinged out? It never occurred to me that that was in my purview.
Representative Schwartz, it is not in your purview. As Senator Kinski noted earlier, you will be voluntold when and where to meet.
Thank you for confirming that, Mr. Chairman.
As all of us are. Very good. Is there anything else? Speaker Harshman. You're muted, Speaker Harshman.
My apologies, Mr. Chairman. Just a thought about some of our discussions today. You know, in the budget bill, we've suspended the tips on the common school, I think the higher ed and the Hathaway during this fiscal year. So those reserve accounts have grown. And but then I was, thinking about, you appropriators. We generally do like a 4-year, forecast with Craig. And really our reserve accounts only last 3 years at 150%. And I'm just wondering, so we guarantee currently the 3.75 and with the general fund and the SIPA, and then the 5% and so on, 4.75 the higher ed, just about moving those all to 200%. And really just that concept and bring that bill back for us maybe to look at in a month or whatever, but and how we do that. So anyway, I didn't know if that's appropriate now or if I just talk to you and the chairman and maybe you guys bring it or throw it out there for the committee to think about.
If you'd like to throw it out for the committee to think about, we could always, if there's enough consensus, we can have it drafted. We certainly don't have to take any formal vote on it, just a consensus. Is it worth the drafting? Or if you'd rather, you can work with myself and the chairman on it. Your call, Speaker.
Yeah, I don't know. Members, I don't know how you feel about that in any discussion.
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Hicks?
Yeah, along those lines, I guess it always comes down to what the effect of that is. And so maybe if we could have fiscal staff run those projections out for 2 bienniums. I'm not going to vote on something. I have no idea what the ramifications are. So, but we could run those scenarios, and what happens if we go to a 200%? How long is that fund solvent? What impact does that have on the corpus as far as the tips that would flow back in there? With that information, I might be able to support it one way or but right now I don't have enough information of what the impact of that would be. But I would like to look at it.
Well, good. I think, Mr. Chairman, I think that's good. If I think Senator Hicks is right on. Maybe I can just work with you and the chairman and LSO Fiscal and get that ready for us and get some information out.
I think that'd be good. Sounds great. Senator Guru.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just going to say, yeah, I have no problem at all. If we get that, Senator Hicks is right. If we get the fiscal information and a bill draft, then we can make an informed decision. That'd be awesome. So.
Very good. that's how we will proceed on that idea. If it's okay with you, Mr. Speaker, that sounds like a good approach. Anything else for the committee? Senator Hicks?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just one observation. I'm glad that the public, and particularly those publics that are interested in animal rights, don't spend a lot of time watching this committee beat dead horses. But with that, I'm thankful for that.
Very good. Thank you. Before we wrap up, I would like to take the opportunity to say thank you to Senator Coe for 32 years, I believe it is, of service. He certainly built a better Wyoming in the last 32 years. He, as the ranchers would say, he's leaving the state in a better place than he found it, although it was not in a bad place when he found it, but certainly better. And I just want to wish him well, thank him for all his mentorship to me personally. It's great to call you a friend, Senator Coe, and so thank you for your 32 years, if I'm not mistaken, years of service. Certainly appreciated. And glad to see you on the screen one last time. Wish we would have been in person to give you a pat on the back. So thank you.
And raise a glass.
And raise a glass, exactly. I'd also like to thank my incoming colleague, or the colleague that came in with me into the legislature, Representative Kirkbride, true statesman for the state of Wyoming, has done an absolutely outstanding job over the last 8 years. Somebody that I could lean on, and I certainly appreciated having him in the House and leaned on him regularly. So thank you, Representative Kirkbride, for your years of service. And please don't go too far. As you're very well aware, the legislature has lots of boards and commissions, and your quality people like you are always needed. So I'm sure we'll see you soon in that capacity. So thank you for your service.
It's been a pleasure working with you all, and I wish you my best as you go forward.
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for that. I'm moving on, and I've been on this committee on and off a lot. And really appreciate the friendship and support and the kind comments. So thank you very much.
Hear, hear. Anything else for the good and the well-being of the committee? If not, I think we will be adjourned. So we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you, Mr. Vice